Okay, let's move on to the next topic, exception handling. So in programs, there may be chances of it's chances of a program throwing the exceptions, which means an error. So Java provides an exception handling, which is a powerful mechanism to handle those runtimes error. Because if a program is thrown by an exception, the program will stop abruptly, but we don't need a program to stop that abruptly. For this, we need to handle that exception. So basically, an exception is an event that stops the normal execution of program. So to ensure the normal flow of the program, we need to handle those exceptions created by the program. So why do exception occurs? The exception occurs due to maybe some invalid user input. For example, in the integer box, if you mention a string means it will throw some exception. Likewise, there are some faulty errors in the codes like dividing a number by 0, which leads to infinity. So in these cases, the exception will occur. There are two types of exception is there. One is an checked exception, also called as compile time exception. So exception that are checked at compile time. For example, input output exception and SQL exception are thrown while compile the program. So this we can solve by during the compile time. But there are some errors which will throw the runtime, which will throw in a runtime only, which are called as unchecked exceptions, also called as runtime exception. Exceptions like arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, or runtime exception, which will happen during the runtime. So we need to handle those exceptions to assure the normal flow of the program. So how Java provides three important things to handle those exceptions, which is called as try, catch, finally blocks. So the code that may throw the exception have to be put under the try block. So the try block basically contains the faulty code. And the next one is if code inside the try block throws an exception, we need to catch that exception and show to the user like this was the exception that caused during the program. So for this, we need to use the catch block. So if we use the catch block means it will show to the users like what the exception this was and the program stops. But in our program, we need some codes which have to be used, which have to be run regardless of whether an exception throw or not. For these types of codes, we need to put them in a finally block. So to solve the exception, first of all, we need to use the catch block. So as you can see in the image, dividing a number by 0 will lead to an arithmetic exception. Since it may cause the program to stop, we put the code in the try block. So this may have the chances to throw an exception like arithmetic exception. So in the catch statement, we will catch the exception that was thrown by the try block and catch the exception in the catch block and shown that the user like division by 0 is not available. For this, for like this, try catch block is used. The next one is throw keywords. So throw keywords is used mainly like if a method, there will be a method which was invoked by some other classes or method, but the method that presented will have the chances to throw some exception. So if we have a method which may have the chances of throwing an exception means we should have to import the keyword like throws which exception. We can include that IO exception, like we can specifically mention what type of exception it was. Otherwise, we can simply put a normal exception keyword. So here the read file method will have will have the chances to throw the exception. So we will put the throws IO exception. So if the read file method is invoked by some other methods, we should have to handle the exception in that method. So for this, we can use the throws keyword. The next one is custom exception. In Java, for exception classes, some other codes are written inbuiltly. So if we don't need that code and we have to use the custom exception means we should have to use this slide. We should have to use like this one, but the custom class should have to extend the exception. Exception is the classes that presented already in Java. So if we need, if we extend that exception class, we can able to use the method that was presented in that exception class. And as I already said, there will be a finally black. So if we have any code that should have to be run, whether the code any exception occurs or not, we can put that code in a final block so that it will run whether it will run even if the exception causes. So this is an example of exception handling. In the try block, we have a file reader. So if the file is not reader, means there will be a cases of is throwing exception. So in the try block, the code that are presented will have the chances to throw more than one exception. It may throw file not found exception. It may throw input out expression. So for a single try block, we can have a 0 catch block or more than one catch block or more than 2. So for a single try block, if it may have the chances to giving more than one exception, means we can separately catch that exception, or we can handle that exception by single handle the exception by putting the exception as single. So instead of having two catch block, we can have a single catch block, and commonly without mentioning the which type of particular exception, we can catch exception as common. So in the finally code, even though if the exception happens, the finally code will run. For example, if you have a database connection in our program means, and the database connection is closed in the last line of try block. So before that, if any exception is caused by the program, the database connection will not be closed and the program will stop. We don't need this type of cases, right? If we start a database connection, we should have to end before closing the program. So closing a database connection is mandatory. So for this type of code, we can put the close inside the finally method. So even though if the exception occurs on the try block, we can close the connections in the finally block.